Well, Turkey, like many developing countries, struggles with large numbers of stray dogs. And there's been a tradition in Turkey. It goes back, all the way to the Ottoman Empire period of time, where actually those dogs were, to a degree, looked after in communities. They were fed, and the dogs were part of cultural life in cities like Istanbul and more modern cities like Ankara today. But the numbers have increased, and there's been concerns raised about safety, about rabies risk, about people being attacked. And this has driven a sort of political wedge through society in Turkey between the more religious, conservative elements of Turkish society that support the AK party and President Erdogan, that's been in power for, for 20 years, increasingly dictatorial power, I would say, in Turkey, and the more secular population within Turkey that have been pressing back, saying that they want political change, who are generally more inclined to have dogs as pets, and just as we see in Western society, treat them with real respect, and also show care and compassion for stray animals as well. But what Erdogan has done in recent months has started to up the ante and increase the temperature of debate in Turkey on this issue for very much political purposes. He's basically started to demonize dogs, and really, as The Economist said last week, has declared them enemies of the state. And he's basically changed the animal welfare law and forced it through Parliament with late-night debates with his party's majority, not allowing the veterinary community and animal welfare community to have a say in this, to basically introduce a new law which would bring in millions of stray dogs from across Turkey into shelters that are appalling. They are really kill shelters. There's no decent animal welfare there. And within 28 days, unless they can be rehomed, and they won't be rehomed because there's no process in place to allow that, they will be euthanized. Now, Turkey doesn't have the ability to euthanize millions of animals, not in any humane way through lethal injection. And what we're beginning to see is that animals are being killed all over the country. They're being poisoned and shot and thrown into open pits. We've had huge problems with this over the years anyway, but it's all come to a head. And there's been a massive global outcry, which the media, to be fair, around the world has picked up on. And there's been a huge amount of protests in Turkey, some of the biggest animal rights protests we've seen anywhere in the world, with a large sort of younger generation getting involved in these, particularly women. So this is a human rights and an animal rights issue in Turkey that really goes right to the heart of the modern nation and where it's going in the future.
I have a load of questions, Dominic, but I just want to say that if anyone's listening with children at the moment, you might just, listening or watching with children, you might just want to be advised that some of the stuff that we're probably going to talk about in the next couple of minutes may be a bit distressing to children, and I just want to make that clear. Dominic, what is in this for President Erdogan? Why is he doing it?
Well, one of the things he's trying to do is the CHP party, the opposition that now controls a lot of cities like Izmir and Istanbul, and is going to be pressing, to take the presidency at the next election. He's got them in his sights. So basically what he's trying to do, he's trying to undermine them. He's basically saying, unless you implement this law, which they don't want to implement, they say it's horrific, it's cruel, they're actually taking it to the Supreme Court. He's threatening to put, heads of municipalities, senior positions within local government into prison for 2 years if they don't do this. So he's using it as a wedge issue. And he's trying to get his support base of more religious, conservative elements in Turkish society that don't necessarily have that much fondness for dogs, who think they're unclean and wouldn't generally have them in the house, for example, in cultural terms, who basically want their dogs to be, taken from the streets. He thinks by doing this and forcing the opposition to a corner, he's going to get more political support. What he hasn't bargained for is the horror of Western tourists who come to Turkey in their millions in an economy with 70% inflation, is in real trouble. Turks can't afford to go on holiday in their own country at the moment. They're going to the Greek islands under a visa scheme. And what we're seeing now is obviously a backlash in Scandinavian countries, in Germany and Holland, across Britain. And we think lots of tourists will not go to Turkey as a result, partly because when they go, I don't know if you've been there, they befriend the animals.
Yeah.
When you're in the resort, you see the dogs and the cats, and it becomes part of the experience. Take pictures and film of them. The thought that they're going there and they're all being round up and killed, and we're seeing the images and they're horrific. Is a real problem for him, and he didn't count on that. And I think we're seeing a lot of pushback from the Turkish media, which is largely state controlled, and there is growing concern this could have a big impact on the economy in Turkey.
So you talked about, and I just emphasise again, if children are listening, you might want to turn off just for two or three minutes, but I just want to ask this question about the poisoning, about being thrown in pits, horrible things that are happening to these dogs. Why is that happening now necessarily, rather than going through the process of sending them to the kill shelters like you say? I mean, none of that should be happening, of course, Dominic, but I just wonder why that's happening now.
if you were going to do this in a way that hit the sort of legislation puts forward, it would mean you would have to have, thousands of shelters across Turkey that could bring in large numbers of animals. Then you'd have to have vets and specialist teams in place to assess the animals for disease risk. Have they got rabies? Are they dangerous to the public? Can they be rehomed? Now, they can't be rehomed, and most of them wouldn't be. If they are a disease risk, yes, possibly they could well be. You have to have rabies control measures in place. And, could they potentially be harmed to other dogs or people? Yeah, they're going to want to put them to sleep. Now, they said they would do that through lethal injection. That's a massive job. It means a lot of, facilities and expertise. Turkey doesn't have it. The municipalities are poor. There's lots of corruption. The shelters that are in place are horrific. The conditions are terrible. So what you find is that people take the law into their own hands. They basically go, well, there's law now that says we can get rid of these dogs. So they go out in the community and they will, hit them with axes and spades and poison them and shoot them, drag them behind vehicles. And we're seeing this across Turkey. And it's horrendous and absolutely appalling cruelty, unimaginable cruelty. And then you're seeing the pits being dug outside these municipal shelters that are being filmed by people because they're being prepared to throw large numbers of animals in and cover them up. We had problems in Turkey over the years. We've had huge cruelty. But the thing that changed attitudes was the terrible earthquake last year. That you remember, 50,000 plus people died in this huge earthquake in middle of Turkey. And thousands of rescue teams came from around the world and brought their dogs with them. And those dogs saved hundreds and hundreds of people in the rubble. And the dogs themselves became, a massive focus of the Turkish media. One particular dog, I think from Mexico, was killed when a building collapsed on it. And across football stadiums in Turkey, they had big posters of the dog and, respecting what the animal had done and the people that it saved. So we thought that maybe attitudes had changed. And I think for the vast majority of people in Turkey, it has. 85% of the Turks who've been polled on this don't want this legislation to kill the dogs. They want to put in place a system by which they can sterilize the dogs, neuter the dogs, microchip the dogs, reduce the numbers down on the streets, which you can do if you put in a proper veterinary policy.
And if you do it humanely,
Absolutely. So, it's a big problem. It's not something that can be easily resolved, but with some resources and commitment and an animal welfare aspect of it, you don't go down the route that Erdogan's going.
You and other campaigners as well, Dominic, you've rattled the Turks. There is some reporting that you sent me as well, really interesting. British media misleads on Turkey's stray dog law urging a boycott. And actually there's a lot of, it's not misleading, it's telling the truth about what's happening and it's calling out what Erdogan wants to do. But clearly there is the international response. You talked about the tourism aspect and so on, but also just the campaigning response. That has rattled people.
Absolutely, and this is there's a lot of debate about Elon Musk, isn't there, and Twitter and X at the moment. And my view on all of this is that X probably does need some form of regulation beyond where it is at the moment. But it's a terribly important forum for sharing information. My social media on this has reached over 20 million people in the last 10 days. And a lot of that's been in Turkey. So you can't, avoid it. It's there. The videos you do, I could record a video piece in my back garden. Hundreds of thousands of people across Turkey will see it, will end up in the Turkish media. People start talking about it. That's the power that we have to try and deal with people like Erdogan. Erdogan took down Instagram in Turkey and has been arresting people on the streets who've been going on saying he's trying to shut them out on social media, because it's a country where that can happen, as you know.